released exclusively to this programme show the number of women being convicted of domestic violence has risen by 30% in the last 12 months. It's 6 times higher than it was 10 years ago. In the year up to April, there were just over 7,000 prosecutions against women, and almost 7 out of 10 of them ended in convictions. Well, last month, the Crown Prosecution Service was criticised for including these figures in a report called Violence Against Women and Girls, something it's now promised to correct. Although prosecutors aren't able to give a breakdown of the gender of the victims, the figures do suggest that more male victims are coming forward, so that's part of the reason. More are being believed, that's another part, and then more are getting justice. It is worth pointing out that there are still many more men than women being convicted of domestic violence, 63,000 in the last year, which is quite a figure, isn't it? And that figure has risen too in recent years. In a moment, we'll speak to Mark Brooks from the charity Mankind. Before that, though, we're joined by Ken Gregory. Ken's in Peterborough. And in March this year, his second wife, Teresa Gilbertson, was jailed for 4 years for boiling water over his head. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, Chris.
Nice to speak to you. How are you this morning?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
You're doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
Take us back, because I want you to just give us the full story here, the context of what led up to this day as well, so our listeners get a real understanding of what you had to go through here. But take us back to that day, first of all, when you were so badly injured. What happened, Ken?
I was at home. I would have been going to Essex to take flowers to my late wife's grave, but I suffer with spinal arthritis. And I said to Teresa that I didn't think I would drive down to Essex as I was going to pick her mum up next day. Mm. So I was a little bit sensitive that day because it was a special day for me.
Yeah, because you had been married for 30 years before, hadn't you?
No, I was with my first wife for 40 years.
40
married
years,
for
beg your pardon.
36,
wow,
yes.
Wow, okay.
And it was an idyllic marriage. So a lot of trust. And, of course, I had that when passing on to Teresa, who had a bit of a shady background from previous marriages, and I thought that I could probably make a better life for her than she'd had.
Right.
So we eventually, after a short period of a short courtship, if you like, we actually got married.
Yeah.
And initially things were good, and then Teresa started to change, becoming quite abusive verbally initially, not any violence as such, but it wouldn't matter if we was in company or not. She would get she could be quite cutting with remarks and things like that. And generally in the house, she had an idyllic life really, because I paid for everything. I did all the cooking, driving, such. The only thing she actually ever did was a little bit of laundry. I had a lady who used to do the cleaning and the ironing, so she had quite an easygoing life, really. Mm. But she started, sort of about 3 months before this incident, she'd started saying that she needed paying for doing the laundry, because, according to her, the servants in Downton Abbey got paid, and she felt she should be paid. I did point out to her that as I was paying for everything else, which she told me was my job as a husband, and I did mention that perhaps the laundry was her job as a wife, but that didn't seem to go down very well. So at this day, she started this nonsense about being paid for the laundry, and she just kept on. As I say, it was a sensitive day for me, and I said to Teresa, OK, she'd mentioned if I wasn't happy about things, getting a divorce beforehand, and I'd have half the house and this, that and the other. So I'd taken a little bit of legal advice, basically just to know how I stood, but not because I wanted a divorce or anything. And I'd always said to Teresa, when she mentioned divorce, I said, that's not what the issue is. It's a matter of talking through any of these issues, problems. And as I say, she just kept on and on this particular day, and eventually I'd said to her I'd had enough, and I would go down the line of getting a divorce, and I would see the solicitor the next morning. About 10 minutes after she had said fine, she kept asking me if I would like a cup of tea, and I was busy doing something on the computer, and I said, when I've finished, I'll do that. I'll make a cuppa to myself. And I was working on the thing I knew was I had all the scalding water pouring over me. She'd boiled a kettle, filled a 2-litre jug, come in behind me. I hadn't seen her come in at all. And she just poured this water straight over my head. And then she just stood back, her arms folded, and said, "There you are." While I was trying to get T-shirts off and such like, to get this water away from my body, went down and got a towel wet to put on myself. And she just stood looking quite blank, not concerned at all about what she'd done. So I then phoned for an ambulance and phoned the police. The police came along, and I didn't know until the trial. She said if I'd wanted to kill him, I'd have got a knife. So that was what she got arrested at that point, obviously making that statement. And then we had a year's wait for the trial.
This is an incredibly cold individual we sound like we're talking about here, Ken. Someone who can pour 2 litres of boiling water over someone they're married to, stand back and say, "There you are," and do nothing whilst you're doing all you
and just
can.
seeing everything, like my head was going redder and redder, obviously.
We've put some pictures, by the way, just in terms of the injuries that you got. We've put some pictures which you've kindly given to us on the 5 Live Twitter feed this morning, and I've watched them, and they are horrendous. The level of pain you must have been experiencing must have been...
It was... I think... obviously the pain, but the shock, the whole thing, that she could do this, and what was happening to me, and obviously concerned for myself. It's a very sort of, you probably don't necessarily feel all of the pain because of all of this other emotion initially.
Yeah, I understand.
But that does certainly kick in a little bit later. But it wasn't the first. That wasn't the first incident, because a couple of weeks prior to that, early hours of the morning, I have this spinal arthritis. So some nights I don't sleep very well, and if it's damp, that seems to aggravate it. And it had been a particularly cold night, and I'd been up and down, made myself a drink, and gone to bed about 5 o'clock. And fortunately, then I'd fallen asleep. And we had 2 young dogs that used to normally make a fuss about 6:30, 7 o'clock, because they wanted to get up and go out to toilets, and as young dogs do.
Yeah.
Teresa had obviously been disturbed by the dogs and got up to let them out. And obviously this had irritated her. She made tea, brought in, because I would normally go off into the spare bedroom so that I didn't disturb her. And I was sound asleep, and she poured half of this mug of hot tea on my face. At the time, said it was an accident, that the dogs had jumped up and jogged her.
Did you believe
which
her?
I didn't. At that time, yeah, I had no reason not to, and I'm sort of saying to her, "Oh, don't upset yourself. It's an accident," and such like. And then because it had gone into my ear was all swelling, and I said, "I better get taken to the hospital," because I thought I need to go to have this looked at in my ear. And she was rather reluctant to me going. "Oh, it's nothing, it's only a small bit of water," which was about half of a large mug actually. And she obviously didn't want me to go to the hospital, because I assume it would have been recorded, which it was. So that was an incident approximately 2 weeks prior to the actual serious one.
So look, I've only spoken to you for a short while, Ken, but I think, myself and people listening to this will have concluded that you sound like a very, very reasonable man who has gone through something very, very horrific. And she ended up going to prison, didn't she? You went through the court case.
She got 4 years.
Did she ever show any remorse?
Never, not to up to today. Still no remorse whatsoever. Total contempt for me. So I'm a little bit I found that the one of the reasons that I've sort of made a sort of stand and said about people reporting is to raise awareness, because I found that when I was in court, it very much felt as though I was the person on trial, and a lot of this is because of people's perception of domestic violence. I've spoken with some groups of people, and I've asked what their perception of domestic violence was, and you'll find that 99% of people will say, "Oh, it's a woman being beaten by a man. There's a man who was being violated."
Yeah, I mean, still the vast number, as we said, of abusing women. But as you say, you know, there are so many cases of around that we. So it's a very good thing to point out, Ken. If you are a man, by the way, and you've been a survivor of domestic violence, or if you think you're going through it now, if you're hearing what Ken has been through and you want to share your story with us, then do give me a call, because some of this will be about awareness. 0500 909 693 is the phone number. The text number, of course, 85058. Let's try and understand a bit more of what some people are clearly going through. What do you think, Ken? What do you think was wrong with Teresa?
I believe that I believe she'd had problems in. I know she'd had problems in 2 other marriages, but in this particular incident, the whole thing, I think, was based on the marriage from my point of view, and having analysed and knowing what's going on at the moment, that in a way she'd really targeted me as a prospect for financial gain. She'd had 2 good settlements from previous divorces, and she's very money orientated, and I believe that the whole thing was planned, because she had already raised divorce papers prior to we went on a cruise in February last year, because this happened in March. And so she allowed me to take her out on a cruise and everything, but she'd already been to a solicitor and raised papers, but she hadn't got any grounds. And I believe she was trying to aggravate me to give her grounds for the divorce, so that she could use that for monetary gain, you know.
Yeah.
And part of the anger, because she was violent when she got angry, as proven with the dogs and then with this incident. And what had angered her was that I'd really broken up her plan.
Yes, you had closed the door on it.
I'd shut that door,
Yeah.
and obviously that annoyed her, and she got into this. So I think she's got something that's going on, and she probably needs help, but she would never. Teresa always knows better than everybody else.
Yeah, okay. Ken, stay with us. Let's just have a brief word with Mark Brooks, who's from the charity Mankind. And Mankind, just to make it clear for our listeners, Mark, you support men who have been through these kind of experiences, ultimately, and raising awareness yourselves.
Yes, we run a helpline for male victims, and we also give male victims a voice and campaign on their behalf to make sure that domestic abuse is seen as a issue that affects men as well as women.
And Ken's story, obviously an absolutely awful one, and the impact it has had on him, physically, mentally, all the rest of it. But you'll be very familiar with all these kind of stories and the different forms that domestic abuse can take as well, Mark, whether it be physical or whether it could be the verbal abuse that Ken was talking about that first came along.
Well, often the damage is done in terms of psychological or emotional abuse, where the person who's committing the domestic abuse psychologically controls the victim, cuts him off from his friends and family, often from his finances as well. And then what then can happen is that when a man then works out this is happening and then tries to resist it, this is when the domestic abuse can actually escalate into then violence, which is clearly what happened in Ken's situation. So it's often the psychological and emotional abuse first, and then the violence may come.
How encouraging?
It certainly does give us encouragement, because it means more when they are called to an incident, they see it it for what it is, then
How and why has that
really
changed?
has changed.
Why?
Well, I think it's changed two reasons. First of all, the training that police receive now is far better. Just become self-educated in that they've seen our victim, or they recognise it more. Some police forces do awareness camps. 5 years ago, those campaigns didn't exist, and we would like far more of them.
Yeah. And so the police fighters have been brought, and a accused woman is then
done social experiments, videos online, authority, whether that's their GP or the NHS or the police or other, call that awareness. And we can do that by having councils, the NHS and the police raising the bar when it comes to making sure that they reach out to male victims.
Yeah, and I'm interested in that, because do men always recognise themselves as being victims of domestic violence?
One of the issues that you rightly say is that men often don't feel or recognise that they are victims, but this comes full circle in terms of this lack of awareness, because they're not recognising it, because they don't see any awareness campaigns, they don't see society generally recognising or talking about it, and therefore they don't see any services either available locally. So often we get men who call us, they've been a victim for at least 3 years before they actually seek help, and that's because they think they're the only one in the world who is a victim of domestic abuse when they have a female partner.
I suppose, do they think,
so that is an issue.
Do they think, oh, we'll manage this situation in the end? You know, we'll get back on track with this in the end?
The common reason that men and often women stay in a relationship when there's domestic abuse is because they love their partner, they think that they can change their partner, they also may have children in the household, so they will do all they can to actually try and manage the behaviour of the abuser, but that's why it takes up to, as I said, on average 3 years for a man to actually seek help. And we always say that if this abuse is happening and it's systematic, you need to find an escape route, because there is help out there. And as Ken says, he went to the police supported him,
yes.
and this is what happened. One last point, Chris, is just really that we get around 1 in 5 calls to our helpline from mothers and from sisters, from daughters, from work colleagues, and so our helpline and other helplines out there, they are available for other people to call if they think a man that they know is suffering, and it's really important they pick up the phone. Indeed.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. That's Mark Brooks from the charity Mankind. Ken, just before you go, a few of our listeners getting in contact. Incredible poor guy, says Rob. Another one here saying, nasty, horrible woman. Ken sounds like a great man. She should have been locked up for longer. How's life at the moment on?
Some issues that come at the back end of having a divorce. There's the financial side that has to be sorted. So until that becomes done and dusted, I can't fully put it behind me, because that still sort of hangs over your head. When laying awake, that's one of those things that goes through your mind, because obviously I've seen what she wants to sort of claim, because the whole thing was based around getting a lump sum.
Yeah.
And so that has to be sorted. Although I get assurances that the situation is such that, you know, these sort of things shouldn't happen, it's very much a case of, because I think, as was being said about the awareness and things like that, that you still, as a man, are not fully trusting the system to support you.
Yeah.
You have that sort of in the back of your mind that, you know, yes, okay, people are telling me that it's going to be fine, but until it actually is, they're still not absolutely sure. And I agree about the awareness. There isn't a lot out there to indicate to men that there's support. There are these groups, but they need to put themselves out there more, advertising and such like, because if you go into any support area, social services, you'll see posters and it's always about violence against women.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what we can do. We have got a couple of helplines that people can call. And look, I'd say thank you very much indeed, Ken, and thanks for coming on and sharing your story with us, and best of luck for the future, okay?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris.
All right, all the very best. Ken Gregory sharing his story with us. If you want to speak to someone about a domestic abuse, if you're a man, you can call Mankind's Helpline, the charity we just heard from, 01823 334 244. So it's 01823 334 244. Elsewhere, the National Domestic Violence Helpline, if you're a man or a woman, 0808 2000 247. So 0808 2000 247. We'll touch upon this subject again as the programme goes on, and do get in contact if you want to share your story with us this morning. 0500 909 693. Love to speak to you. The text number is 85058. Right, before we go to the news headlines, it's the first day of the final